Welcome to Beyond the Comfort Zone Talking Shit with KING-KAMBUF. Today we are diving right into a really critical part of the curriculum for the Master Architect Builder Statesman. This is the DBSK daily lecture and assignment, and we're tackling governing the built environment. Specifically, decision rights, accountability, and delivery power.
This is really where we stop talking about aesthetics and, start talking about survival.
Survival, that's a good word for it.
It is. I mean, you can design the most beautiful, most efficient building in the world, but if you don't understand the mechanisms of power, who decides, who funds, who approves, that design is just going to die on the vine.
Exactly. And our thesis for this whole deep dive is, well, it's pretty crucial. Cities, bridges, transit lines, they aren't fundamentally designed. They are decided.
Yes.
Decided. And the decisions that matter most are about land, money, time, and of course, risk. If you, the leader, can master this governance framework, you stop being a passive applicant. You start actually steering your projects through all that political turbulence.
Our mission today is to equip you with that strategic understanding of institutional power. We're trying to give you the shortcut to the highest level of leadership, which really, it requires knowing how to build consensus and how to ensure your project's financial and legal longevity.
And we're going to start with a foundational model that governs every single successful capital project. It's a simple, powerful triangle: authority, resources, and accountability.
And if those three elements are not perfectly aligned, the project ecosystem it fails.
So let's start with that first vertex, authority.
Right. Let's dissect it. When we talk about a major public works project, authority isn't just one monolithic thing. It's not that simple. We have to map out distinct types of decision-making power.
And if you mix them up,
you get gridlock. Guaranteed. It's a surefire way to cause it.
Okay, so let's unpack that. If I'm trying to get, say, a major new housing complex approved, I'm dealing with more than just one yes or no, right? What are these distinct forms of authority?
So we define three. First, you have policy authority. This is the highest level, the legislative level. They're setting the budget, passing the zoning laws, deciding if the city will pursue affordable housing in the first place.
So that's the city council, maybe the board of supervisors.
Or the state legislature, yeah. They're setting the big picture mandate.
Okay, so from that mandate, we move to the people who have to interpret it.
Precisely. That's administrative authority. This is held by the agency executives, the head of the planning department, the director of public works. They take that broad policy and create the specific regulations, the forms, the schedules needed to actually implement it.
They're interpreting the rules.
They are. And then finally, you get the power that directly affects the site, the contractor, the structural integrity itself.
The nuts and bolts.
That's technical authority. This is pure enforcement power. This is the engineer reviewing the structural load calculations, the inspector on site enforcing the standards, and, the building official giving that final sign-off.
So there's a clear hierarchy here that you absolutely must map for every project. It starts with the council, flows down to the executive agency setting the rules, filters to the professional staff, and finally gets to the consultant and the contractor who are, actually doing the work.
And understanding that chain is vital. It's so important because the administrative and technical staff, they're rarely empowered to change the high-level policy, even if they know it's impractical. They are rule enforcers.
Not rule makers.
Exactly.
And within that flow, there's one specific technical role that holds, well, it seems like truly disproportionate power when it comes to construction codes. I'm talking about the authority having jurisdiction, the AHJ.
Oh, the AHJ, yes. The AHJ is the final arbiter of code interpretation. Think of them as the ultimate technical referee.
The referee, I like that.
Right. If your design clashes with a strict reading of the code and you want to propose an alternative solution, say a performance-based design, the AHJ has the power to accept or reject that deviation.
And here's where it gets really interesting, because the power of the AHJ isn't just about technical compliance. It's about delay.
It absolutely is.
The power to interpret the code is essentially the power to decide if your building stands, or if it sits in bureaucratic limbo for another 6 months waiting for a review board. So knowing who the AHJ is and understanding their specific appeal process, that's just foundational project management.
It is. So once we've mapped that org chart and we've identified that ultimate technical referee, the next step is to drill down into the practical mechanics of project control. This is what we define as decision rights.
Okay, decision rights. These are the specific points where the money, the scope, and the schedule are actually committed. The gates.
The gates, exactly. We're talking about budget authority, who can approve a change order, scope authority, who can authorize adding or subtracting program elements, and technical sign-off.
And you've got to mention the most potent one.
Oh, of course. The most project-ending decision right of all. Stop work power.
Nuclear option.
It is the nuclear option. Knowing precisely who has that authority and under what specific safety or contractual conditions it can be used is absolutely critical for managing risk.
Because if these decision rights are fuzzy, that's when we hit the critical failure modes that, they plague projects all over the world. The sources point to 3 major governance bottlenecks that just stall or destroy capital projects.
Right. The first one is unclear ownership. Just imagine a massive mixed-use waterfront revitalization project.
Sorry.
If the Parks Department, the Transit Authority, and the Economic Development Corporation all have overlapping but ambiguous roles, when a problem comes up, say, they find contaminated soil.
Which always happens.
Always. No single entity feels responsible for leading the very expensive remediation. They just point fingers and the whole project freezes.
We've all seen that freeze.
Yeah.
Okay, what's number 2? The bureaucratic nightmare, duplicated approvals.
Ugh. This is death by 1,000 cuts. It's when you need 4 separate committees spread across 2 different agencies to sign off on the exact same environmental impact report revision.
So it's not even that they're hostile, they're just inefficiently organized.
That's it. That duplication turns what should be a 2-week review into a 6-month delay. We have to design governance to minimize those redundant sign-offs.
And the third, the elephant in the room that every leader has to confront, political overrides.
Yes. You've followed every single rule, you've hit every technical milestone, but a newly elected council member or just an angry vocal constituency pressures the executive to pause or cancel the project right in the middle.
And that often happens because the foundational governance was just too vague. Right?
Exactly. The politicians realize they can just override the technical and financial decisions because the project charter didn't clearly define the decision gates or establish independent delivery criteria.
This just highlights that governance isn't some kind of bureaucratic fluff. It directly drives measurable project performance.
It's everything. When governance is tight, you get schedule certainty. You're targeting a variance of less than 10%. When it's sloppy, your schedule uncertainty can jump to 30–40%.
And costs.
And it ensures cost certainty through contingency discipline. If your decision rights are clear, there's a disciplined process for accessing contingency funds. If they're unclear, those funds get rated early or they just balloon through uncontrolled change orders because no one had the explicit authority to say no.
So let's talk solutions. What are the governance solutions to these risks? The checklist for effective governance must have some clear mitigation strategies.
It does. To mitigate political interference, you have to front-load the political buy-in and then you codify it with a clear project charter.
So it's like a contract.
It's essentially a contract that defines the scope, the boundaries, the performance metrics, and it makes it politically difficult, not impossible, but difficult to interfere arbitrarily later on.
And what about fighting off that inevitable scope creep?
Formal decision gates. You mandate that the project only moves past, say, 30% design when the budget is locked down and the primary environmental permits are secured.
It forces discipline.
It forces discipline and stops that natural tendency for stakeholders to demand just one more small addition. And then there's transparency in procurement, having transparent criteria for vendor selection. That's your shield against procurement challenges that can tank a project for years.
Yes. That leads us really smoothly to the second leg of our alignment triangle. Accountability. So we've given people authority, hopefully the resources, but how do we make sure that power is used wisely and responsibly?
This is where we need to stress a really critical distinction. It's one that often gets blurred in public discourse, and it's the difference between answerability and enforceability.
Hang on. So if I stand in front of a community council and I explain why the budget went up by 5%, isn't that accountability?
That is answerability. You are explaining your actions. But true accountability requires more. It means being subject to inspection, to audits, to judicial review. That's enforceability.
Ah, I see. So answerability is a discussion.
And accountability is a legal mechanism. And the foundation for both is transparent reporting. If the public, the media, or auditors can't clearly trace the decision path, there's no effective accountability loop.
And the very institutional structure of the city itself dictates how this delivery power is distributed and therefore how accountable the system is.
Absolutely. Just look at the difference between governance models. In a strong mayor system, the executive holds consolidated power. Projects can move with speed and efficiency because decisions are so centralized.
But that speed, I imagine, could come at the cost of less oversight.
It can, yes. Now, compare that to a council-manager system. The elected council sets policy, and they delegate the administrative management to a professional city manager. That structure prioritizes broader political representation, more review layers.
Which often slows down delivery.
Right, but potentially increases the checks and balances.
And then you have these other entities created specifically for delivery, like independent authorities, special districts, or those public-private partnership boards.
Their governance design is so critical, their foundational charter is basically their constitution. It has to explicitly balance the need for private sector efficiency, which is why they were created in the first place, with robust public control.
And if that balance isn't clearly defined,
You risk creating an entity that is technically competent, but politically and financially opaque, an island of unchecked power.
okay, let's talk money, the resources side of the triangle. Governance is often seen as this compliance cost, but it's much more integral than that. It drives specific, significant line items on every public budget.
This is where the master architect builder statesman has to look past the physical materials and recognize the true costs of managing complexity. When we look at the top 10 governance-driven cost line items, many are just administrative overhead directly proportional to how weak or strong that governance structure is.
Okay, so give us some of the big-ticket items here.
Program management, for one. If you have unclear governance, you need way more managers just to coordinate overlapping responsibilities. Then there's legal counsel, compliance reporting, which just explodes when transparency mandates are strict, and, crucially, claims and dispute resolution.
Let me guess. A project with vague contracts and unclear decision rights will.
Inevitably have higher claims costs because every single dispute goes to litigation.
And we have to understand the budgeting split here. These costs aren't all operational, are they?
No, and this is a critical budgeting detail. Items like program oversight, public engagement services, setting aside risk reserves, those are CapEx, capital expenditures. They're capitalized within the project budget itself.
They're seen as part of the asset creation cost.
Exactly. But the administrative side is different.
That's the OpEx.
That's the OpEx side operational expenditures. Ongoing costs like ethics training, monitoring boards, the administrative staffing that ensures the system functions. That's OpEx. And a failure to budget for both CapEx governance items and ongoing OpEx accountability measures just guarantees financial shortfalls later on.
So you pay now for strong systems.
Or you pay exponentially more later in delay and litigation.
As leaders, eventually we are going to face scenarios where the rules just clash. This is where ethics under pressure becomes paramount, and it reinforces our professional role as a duty bearer to the public interest.
These are the moments that truly test institutional design. A really common conflict is when speed conflicts with equity. We're under intense political pressure to fast-track a new infrastructure project.
Right.
But accelerating the schedule might mean cutting short the crucial outreach you need to ensure marginalized groups have proper access, a real voice, and recourse. Beyond just checking off a consultation box.
Or when the letter of legality conflicts with justice, where following the law precisely might lead to an outcome that is clearly unfair or disproportionately harmful to one part of the community.
Exactly.
So what's the leader's first non-negotiable step when a serious conflict of interest or an ethical breach happens on their team?
The primary protocol has to be immediate and transparent. Disclosure and recusal.
Not silence, not delay.
Never. When a conflict arises, you don't stall, and you don't try to manage it quietly. Transparency is the antidote to suspicion. Silence only compounds the problem, and it erodes public trust irreparably. If a decision is transparent and explainable, even if it's unpopular, public trust generally stays higher.
And the ultimate lesson here, which really ties back to the whole idea of governance design, is that ethical failure is rarely the result of a single, purely evil bad actor.
No, not at all. It is almost always a system that allows ambiguity to be exploited.
So if decision rights are unclear,
Or if the budget approval process is opaque, someone will use that lack of clarity for private gain, whether it's through corruption or just managerial self-interest. Leadership in this environment, it really boils down to institutional design. It's about creating a system so clear, so explicit, that it preempts the opportunity for ambiguity to become a source of failure.
okay, let's bring this back home for you, the leader working on that next big civic transformation project.
Yeah.
We need to synthesize these core takeaways into, say, 3 action items.
Okay. First, You must identify your authority having jurisdiction, who holds that ultimate technical hammer on site.
Right.
Second, you have to map your decision rights explicitly. Who decides on scope, budget, change orders, and that all-important stop work power.
And third, you have to ensure you've perfectly aligned that authority, resources, and accountability triangle.
Because power without enforceable accountability is just risk. Remember, clear, explicit, and formally documented decision rights are the absolute foundation of a successful project. They have to be designed with the same rigor you apply to the structural analysis of your bridge or your building.
And this deep dive really sets you up for the assignment that follows. Analyzing failure points and redesigning the governance structure for a civic project. It forces you to immediately apply this lens to a real-world scenario.
Which leaves us with the final provocative thought, the challenge that separates the designer from the master architect builder statesman. And it's this. Leadership in the built environment is the obligation to make authority legible.
Legible, meaning to define in writing who decides what, when, and under whose enforceable scrutiny. Protecting the public interest begins with protecting your collaborators from impossible, ambiguous expectations.
So when you start your next major project, ask yourself this. What does your governance diagram look like when you design it with the same rigor as the project's physical structure?
Is the power structure legible, transparent, and enforceable? If it's not, you haven't finished the design yet.
Welcome back. We're about to get into some really high-level institutional knowledge today, but the goal is to make it incredibly concrete, the kind of insight you need to actually deliver on major public works.
That's right.
We're pulling directly from the Design and Build School of KING-KAMBUF, specifically for the advanced leadership students. This is PA 681, Year 6 doctoral material.
And the topic is everything. It's governing the built environment, decision rights, accountability, and delivery power.
Okay, so let's frame the mission here, because this feels like a real mindset shift.
It is. For too long, designers, architects, engineers, we've acted as service providers. The mission today is to reposition you, the listener, as an institution-literate leader.
Not just an applicant before an agency.
Exactly. You have to understand the machinery that controls the land, the money, the time, and the risk. If you don't, your best designs will just end up as beautiful drawings on a shelf.
So we're moving past asking for permission and starting to understand the systems that grant the power to decide, to fund, and maybe most importantly, to maintain these projects.
Precisely. The source material is really clear on this. Great design fails without governance. It just does. It can't survive the political cycles, the shifting budgets, the public scrutiny.
Right.
So our goal is to give you that fluency. We want you to understand how public decisions are actually made, how authority gets delegated down the chain, and how accountability is enforced. That's what lets a project survive.
So that once the shovel hits the ground, the project has the institutional armor it needs to get to the finish line.
Armor is a good word for it. It's about building a structure that can withstand the pressure.
Right, so let's start with the big foundational concept, the one that, frankly, can be a little humbling for designers, and that is cities are not designed, they are decided.
It's the ultimate challenge to the purity of design, isn't it?
It reframes everything. We're not just in an engineering problem, we're in a political and administrative one.
Right, because design solves a technical problem. Governance has to solve an institutional problem.
Which is the night, exactly.
It's the problem of getting a huge group of people, all with different priorities and agendas, to agree on a path, put money behind it, and then actually stick to the plan.
And if you just treat it as a technical exercise,
you're basically just waiting for the political system to derail you. It's why the lecture introduces this foundational triangle: authority, resources, and accountability.
Okay, this seems simple on the surface, but I have a feeling the devil is in the details. The key is alignment.
Perfect alignment. If any one of those three corners of the triangle is weak, the whole system just collapses.
So let's break that down. Authority is
the legal right to make a decision. The power given by a law or by delegation.
And a resource.
That's the tangible stuff.
Yeah.
Money, time, land, people. The means to actually execute the decision.
And accountability is the tether, the thing that ensures it's all being done for the public good.
It's the oversight, the transparency, the enforcement.
Okay, let's run a failure analysis on this because this is where it gets real. What happens when you have a lot of authority and plenty of resources, but almost no accountability?
That is the classic recipe for a bridge to nowhere.
I was just thinking that.
Right. You have a powerful agency, you have a huge pot of money from a bond, but the meetings are all behind closed doors, the contracts aren't public.
So decisions get made to benefit what? Political allies, special interests.
Exactly. The project gets built, but it's wildly over budget, the quality is questionable, and it doesn't actually serve a real public need. The system becomes an engine for exploitation because there's no check on power.
A fast failure. Okay, what about the opposite? The slow death. Strong accountability, the money is there, but the authority is weak or fragmented.
Ah, that's paralysis. That's death by 1,000 vetoes.
So like 5 different city departments all have to sign off, but no one has the final say.
You've got it. Planning, utilities, transportation, parks. They all have a piece of the puzzle, but no one has the authority to put it together. So you just have endless meetings and analysis, and the project stalls for years.
Even with the best intentions.
Absolutely. The public is involved, the budget is allocated, but no one has the clear right to say, this is the decision we're moving forward.
Last scenario. You've got clear authority, strong accountability, but the resources, the time and money are just not there.
That's project collapse. The budget is a fantasy, or the deadline is impossible.
So you're forced to cut corners.
You cut corners, you compromise on quality, or you end up in massive litigation because the contractor realizes the project is fundamentally unbuildable for the price. The triangle has to be in balance.
So this all leads back to the very first step for you as a leader.
Yes.
You have to map the decision authority. If you can't draw a map of who decides what, you can't do anything else. You have to know where the power actually lives.
And to map that authority correctly, you can't just look at an org chart. You have to differentiate the layers of public power: legislative, executive, and administrative.
Okay, let's start at the top. Legislative power. That feels straightforward.
It's the highest altitude. This is your city council, your elected body. They set the big rules, the major policies. They create what we call policy authority.
So they're the ones saying, we will invest $500 million in light rail.
Exactly. Or all new buildings must be net zero by 2030. They set the what? The big direction.
So if the council sets the policy, why do you even need the executive power? The mayor or city manager?
Because policy needs to be executed. It needs day-to-day management. And the legislature is just not built for that.
They're a debating body.
Right. The mayor or city manager holds the executive power. They implement the policies, they manage the budget, they appoint the agency heads, they coordinate the action to make sure all the different city departments are actually working toward the council's goal.
And then we get down to where most of us live and work,
Okay.
the administrative power.
This is where the rubber meets the road. The planning department, the building inspectors, the city engineers, they don't set the policy.
But they interpret the rules.
They interpret the rules and apply the technical requirements. This is where administrative authority and, crucially, technical authority live.
So the council can say all buildings must be safe, but it's the building inspector who decides if your specific steel beam meets the code.
And that inspector has the power to stop your entire project. Which brings us to that delegation chain in the diagram. Council to agency to staff to consultant to contractor.
It's a chain of shrinking scope, but increasing technical detail?
And increasing veto power at the lower levels. The council can approve a $100 million budget, but a single plan examiner, a member of the staff, holds the technical authority to halt that project indefinitely if your drawings don't comply with their reading of the code.
That's a huge disconnect. The political power authorizes, but the delegated technical power controls the daily reality.
A massive disconnect. And it's why, when we analyze that administrative power, we have to bring in the ethical side of it. That's why the required reading includes Fredrickson's The Spirit of Public Administration.
Okay, so how does Fredrickson change the game here? This isn't just about efficiency.
Not at all.
Yeah.
He argues that social equity has to be a core pillar of public administration, right alongside efficiency.
So for you as the project leader, it means your governance structure has to be not just fast, but also fair.
Exactly. You have to ask, does our permitting process, for example, create barriers for small, minority-owned businesses? Does our zoning variance process shut out community groups?
So it shifts the whole definition of success.
Completely. The question isn't just, did we finish on time and on budget? The question becomes, did our governance structure provide real access, a voice, and fair outcomes for everyone, especially marginalized groups? If it didn't, then even the most efficient system is an ethical failure.
Okay, we've laid the theoretical groundwork. Let's make this super practical now. We're on the job site, in the project meeting. We need to talk about decision rights.
The 4 powers that can make or break you on any given day.
Right. The power to approve, delay, or just stop everything. And the key is that these are often held by completely different people in different departments.
Which creates that natural built-in tension.
Let's start with number 1, budget authority.
The power over the money. Who can release funds? Who can approve a change order that blows past the contingency?
This is usually someone high up, right? A council finance committee or the city manager's office?
Typically. And if you hit contaminated soil and need an extra $5 million, you need their approval. If that process is slow or unclear, your project just sits there, burning time and money while you wait.
Okay, number 2, scope authority.
Who can actually change the definition of the project? This is huge in public works because these things are planned years in advance.
So if a new mayor comes in and suddenly wants to add a sustainability component,
Who has the authority to officially change the project scope without forcing you to go all the way back to square one for approvals? That has to be crystal clear.
number 3, the one we deal with every day, technical sign-off.
This is the authority having jurisdiction, or the AHJ. The people who approve the specific plans and rule on code interpretations.
And this is where you can get those agency conflicts. The city engineer wants one thing.
And the environmental department wants the exact opposite. If you don't know who has the final technical authority, you're just stuck in the middle.
And the last one, the nuclear option, stop work power.
The ultimate lever. This can be an inspector on site seeing a safety hazard, or it can be a court issuing an injunction. You have to know every single person or entity that can legally issue that order.
Okay, let's talk about how this goes wrong, the failure modes. The first is unclear ownership.
This is just bad organizational design. An approval is needed, say, on the final cladding material. But the project charter doesn't say who makes that call. Is it the design agency? Is it the long-term maintenance division?
So everyone just waits for someone else to decide.
And you lose weeks, critical weeks.
Then you have duplicated approvals.
This is bureaucracy at its worst. It comes from a place of caution, but it's paralyzing.
Give me an example.
A historic building renovation. The State Historical Board needs you to submit material samples for approval. At the same time, the local architectural review committee needs the exact same samples, but on a different form with a different deadline.
So you're doing the same work twice and hoping they don't contradict each other?
It's a massive waste of time. And it creates incredible risk if one says yes and the other says no.
And the most painful one, political overrides.
This is what happens when the governance charter is weak. It allows an elected official to jump in late in the game and just undo months or even years of work.
Based on what? A call from a donor? A sudden shift in the political winds?
All of the above. I saw a project where the entire material palette for a public plaza was thrown out after technical sign-off because a new council member's friend just didn't like the color.
That's millions of dollars.
Millions in redesign and delay costs. All because the scope authority wasn't protected from last-minute political whims.
Which is why you recommend the swim lane sketch. This is more than just a diagram.
It's an institutional diagnostic tool. You map the project steps horizontally and the different agencies or decision makers vertically in their own lanes.
And you look for where the lines cross.
That's it. Where do the handoffs happen? Where do multiple agencies have to touch the same step? That's where you find your bottlenecks, your duplicated approvals, your potential conflicts. It lets you see the risk before it happens.
So we've established authority needs to be clear, but it also has to be tethered by accountability.
It's the other side of the coin. You can't have one without the other.
The big question is, what happens when power is misused? What happens when a project goes completely off the rails? How do you hold the system accountable?
Well, the system has to be designed for accountability from the start. The source materials point to 3 main mechanisms: transparency, audits and inspections, and clear ethics rules.
Transparency is the foundation, I assume.
It has to be. We're talking about public records, open meeting laws, sunshine laws, and mandatory reporting. It's why compliance reporting is one of those top 10 governance costs. It takes real effort.
But it builds public trust. If people can see how and why a decision was made,
They're much less likely to assume the worst. The ARE prep questions nail this. Decisions need to be transparent and explainable.
Okay, then you have the more formal checks, audits and inspections.
Right. Audits are for financial accountability. Did the money get spent the way it was supposed to? Inspections are for technical accountability. Oh, is the thing built according to the code? These are the necessary friction points that enforce the rules.
Now let's get into a really critical distinction from the reading, the difference between answerability and enforceability. This feels important.
It's the difference between political theater and real power.
Okay, break that down for me.
Answerability is just the obligation to explain yourself. A public official gets called before a committee and has to answer the question, why did this project go 50% over budget? They have to give an answer.
But that's it. They just have to talk.
That's it. The public knows who to blame, but there's no mechanism to actually fix the problem or claw back the money. It's weak.
So enforceability is the teeth.
Enforceability is the teeth. It means there are actual structured mechanisms, inspectors, courts, auditors, that can compel action.
So answerability is explaining why you used substandard steel.
And enforceability is the building inspector having the legal power to issue a stop work order and make you tear it down and do it right. A strong governance system needs both.
And you can see this in the feedback loops that keep power in check. The public complains.
The media amplifies it, inspectors investigate it, and the courts provide the ultimate legal enforcement. If any link in that chain is broken, accountability fails.
This all seems designed to mitigate the #1 risk on those public projects, political interference.
It is, because political interference thrives in ambiguity. It loves vaguely written rules.
So the best defense is a good offense.
The best defense is a clear governance charter. It's a prophylactic. It says, in writing, who decides what and how those decisions will be reported. When the rules of the game are that explicit and public, it's much harder for a politician to step in and bend them without getting caught.
Okay, so we have to remember that these systems of authority and accountability, they're not one size fits all. They depend entirely on the governance model of the city itself.
100%. You have to understand the municipal DNA you're working with, because that tells you where the risks are.
Let's start with a classic comparison. A strong mayor system versus a council-manager system. How does a strong mayor model change the game?
In a strong mayor system, power is really centralized in the executive. The mayor appoints department heads, controls the budget. The big advantage there can be speed. If the mayor wants your project to happen, they can clear roadblocks very quickly.
But the risk is
volatility. Huge political volatility. A new mayor gets elected, their priorities are different, and your project could be dead overnight.
So the council-manager system is designed to be more stable.
It is. It delegates the day-to-day operations to a professional, non-elected city manager. The goal is administrative stability and technical competence over political wins.
So approvals are probably slower.
Slower, more methodical, more technical. But once a decision is made, it tends to stick because it's insulated from the election cycle. The project is more resilient.
And then you have these other structures like independent authorities.
Right, a port authority or a regional transit board. These are set up to operate outside the normal city government, often with their own funding.
So they can be really fast and efficient.
Incredibly fast. But the trade-off is often in democratic accountability. They're run by appointed boards, not elected officials. So it can be harder for the public to have a say if things go wrong.
And that's different from a special district, like a school district.
It is. A special district has a very narrow, laser-focused mission. If you're building a school, the school district has the budget and scope authority. But the city's planning department might still have technical sign-off on things like zoning or utility hookups. You have to navigate both.
Okay, let's talk about the big one now. Public-private partnerships, or PPPs. The governance here gets really complex.
It's the ultimate balancing act. The source material says this is where the charters matter most, because you're trying to balance public control with private efficiency.
Public good versus private profit.
At its core, yes. The charter has to be surgically precise about who owns what risk, who pays for a schedule delay, who decides if the long-term maintenance standards are being met 20 years from now.
If that charter is vague, where does it break?
It breaks in the change orders and the lawsuits. The private partner wants to minimize their long-term operating costs to maximize their return, while the public wants a durable, high-quality asset for the next 50 years.
So you have to map that out with something like a RACI matrix?
That's a perfect tool for it. Responsible, accountable, consulted, informed, but you're applying it institutionally. Who's accountable for the quality inspection in year 5? Who must be consulted before the private operator can change a major component?
That level of detail seems essential.
It's the difference between a successful partnership and a financial disaster. You have to understand that the institutional architecture is just as critical, if not more so, than the physical architecture.
So we've built the institutional structure. Now we have to stress test it. Let's talk about ethics under pressure when the system starts to bend.
This is where leadership is really defined. It's not just about reacting to a crisis. It's about designing a system that can withstand the pressure in the first place.
The materials point to 2 major conflicts. The first is the classic one, speed versus equity.
Right. You're under intense political pressure to get a project done quickly. So what gives? Often it's the community review process.
Especially for marginalized communities who might not have a strong political voice.
Exactly. The agency might be following the letter of the law for an accelerated review, but by shortcutting genuine engagement, they're creating an inequitable outcome. The process itself becomes an ethical failure.
The second conflict is deeper: legality versus justice.
This is when following the code, or the statute to the letter, actually produces an unjust result.
Like a zoning law that's technically legal, but applying it to a certain neighborhood would lead to mass displacement.
Precisely. The professional is then caught between their legal requirement to follow the code and their ethical responsibility to do no harm. It shows that legality is the floor, not the ceiling. Justice has to be the goal.
And this is why the professional is defined as a duty bearer, not just a service provider.
A service provider just delivers what's in the contract. A duty bearer has a higher ethical obligation to the public interest that can sometimes even override the contract.
There's a quote in the Leadership Minute that really gets at this. The ethical failure is rarely a bad actor alone. It is a system that allows ambiguity to be exploited.
That's the core of it. We focus on the one corrupt official, but the real danger is a vaguely written system. If the rules for selecting a contractor are fuzzy, someone can steer the contract to their friend without ever technically breaking a law.
So leadership is about eliminating that ambiguity.
It's about demanding rigor, crystal clear rules, clear processes, clear lines of authority.
And when a breach does happen, the response has to be immediate. The ARE questions are clear on this. The first step is always
Disclosure and recusal. No hesitation. You can't be silent, you can't delay. You state the conflict of interest, and you remove yourself completely from the decision. It's about maintaining integrity.
And this is why the curriculum has that equity and ethics checkpoint. It's a higher bar than just consultation.
Much higher. Consultation is holding a meeting. This requires verifying that marginalized groups have access, a real voice, and this is key enforceable recourse.
So if they can prove a project harms them disproportionately, there's a real formal mechanism for them to challenge it.
Yes. It moves from just listening to opinions to guaranteeing enforceable, equitable outcomes.
Okay, let's bring all this theory back down to earth with some practical tools. The Design to Delivery Integration Checklist.
This is your institutional due diligence. These are the things you have to lock down before you even think about advancing the design.
First up, identify the authority having jurisdiction, the AHJ.
And, just as important, the appeals body. The AHJ has the final say on code interpretation. If you don't know how to appeal a bad decision, you have no recourse.
Second, you have to clearly separate two processes: permitting versus political approvals.
If you confuse these, you're doomed. Permitting is a technical process run by staff. Political approval is a policy process run by elected officials. They run on totally different tracks. You need the political green light before you spend a fortune on technical permitting.
And third, you have to confirm who has the teeth: the inspection and enforcement authority.
You need to know exactly who can issue that stop work order. Is it the city, the state, the fire marshal? If it's multiple agencies, you need a pre-agreed upon process for resolving conflicts so they don't fight it out on your job site.
Okay, let's shift from avoiding failure to defining success. We're not just building a building, we're trying to achieve governed outcomes.
Right. Success has to be measured by how well the governance worked. So your targets are things like schedule certainty, say a variance of less than 10%, which proves your decision-making process was efficient.
And cost certainty.
Exactly. Strong contingency discipline, which shows your scope and budget authority were respected. And then there's equity compliance. You need measurable outcomes, like tracking how many contracts went to minority-owned businesses.
Now we have to talk about the cost of all this. Good governance isn't free.
Not at all. And these are often hidden costs that you have to budget for proactively.
So what's on that top 10 list of governance-driven costs?
Well, you have the high-level stuff.
Yeah.
Program management to coordinate everyone, legal counsel to draft the charters, a rigorous procurement process.
And you need to think about these as either CapEx or OpEx.
Right. The initial setup, the legal structure, the risk reserves, that's a capital expense. But the ongoing costs of accountability, the ethics training, the monitoring staff, the public records management, that's an operating expense. And if you underfund it, your accountability system will wither over time.
Let's talk about the resolution cost, because these feel like the cost of getting it wrong.
They are. We're talking about change order administration and claims and dispute resolution. If your scope authority is weak, You'll spend a fortune just processing paperwork for endless changes. If your charter is ambiguous, you'll spend even more on lawyers.
So investing in a strong governance structure up front actually saves you money.
It's one of the best investments you can make. It preempts the conflicts that lead to these massive costs down the line.
And there's one last hidden cost, right? The delay and inefficiency premium.
The one contractors build into their bids. If you're a public owner with a reputation for bad governance, slow decisions, late payments, every contractor who bids on your project is going to add 10 or 15% to their price just to cover that risk. So you pay for bad governance one way or another.
Which brings us to the assignment for this module, the decision rights map for a public project. This is where it all comes together.
It forces you to stop being a designer and start being an institutional architect. The first step is simple. Pick a complex public project, a school, a transit line, something with a lot of players.
Then comes the hard part, authority mapping.
This is the deep dive. You have to identify every single entity that has a say, from the top all the way down. And you have to diagram it, showing specifically who can approve, who can delay, and who has that stop work power.
After you've mapped the current state, you move to failure analysis.
You look at your own map and you diagnose the problems. You identify 3 likely bottlenecks or points of conflict. You predict where the system is going to break down based on its structure.
And finally, the most important step, redesign governance.
You don't just identify the problems. You propose the solutions. You recommend a clearer structure. Maybe it's a new program management office. Maybe it's a detailed raw CI matrix for change orders. And you have to include safeguards for equity and ethics.
The grading rubric really tells the story here. Governance logic is 40% of the grid.
That's the whole lesson right there. The clarity and integrity of your decision-making system are weighted more heavily than anything else. The architecture of the institution is more critical than the architecture of the building.
But ethics and community is still a significant chunk, at 15%.
Because efficiency can never come at the expense of justice. That balances everything.
So, to wrap it up, map your decision rights, align authority with accountability, and protect equity with rules that have teeth. And do it all before you start designing.
That's the mark of a leader in this field. You know, we've covered a huge amount of ground here, from abstract ideas about power all the way to specific tools. But if there's one key takeaway, one mindset to adopt, it's this. Power without clarity corrupts projects long before it corrupts people.
That's a powerful statement.
It's true. Your job as a leader is to make authority legible, to define in no uncertain terms who decides what, when they decide it, and under whose scrutiny.
So all this knowledge, from Fredrickson on equity to that distinction between answerability and enforceability, it's all about creating a protective structure for the public and for your own team.
It's the only way to get to a successful outcome that actually lasts.
Okay, so we'll leave you with a final thought to chew on, building on this idea of clarity and enforceability. If we agree that decision rights have to be documented, and accountability requires transparent reporting, what's the single biggest institutional risk to that transparency? And I'm not talking about an individual person acting unethically.
It's systemic failure.
Right, a structural risk. Is it the chronic underfunding of the very offices that are supposed to provide oversight, like the Inspector General or the Records Management Department?
Or is it something more subtle, like the institutional habit of overclassifying documents as confidential or proprietary, effectively shielding them from public view, even when there's no real reason to? Think about how a simple lack of resources for transparency can, over time, completely dismantle the entire accountability framework we've just spent all this time building.
Something to think about. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. Next up, we're shifting into the world of construction management and practice, focusing on managing cost, time, and risk in public projects.